Hello, and welcome to Heavy Hands. I'm your host, Connor Ruebusch. With me, as always, is the man, the legend, Philly Mac, straight out of London. What's up, buddy? How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, not too bad. We got a nice little week off here. We can talk about whatever random shit strikes our minds.
Yeah. Let's talk about, I don't know, you've been watching any of those, like, Marvel TV shows?
Oh, yeah.
I've seen, the DC ones. Like, I've seen, Flash.
Have you actually?
It's really bad. I mean, I haven't watched it, but I have seen it.
I watched some of the Arrow one at some point.
Was it also bad?
I mean, it wasn't bad, but it was also for a series about a man who dresses up in like a green suit and shoots arrows at people. It was weirdly po-faced. I was like, where's the whole Errol Flynn vibe in this show? I'm not understanding this.
I've seen Supergirl and Flash. They're both kind of fun, actually. They're really, really corny, but it kind of works. But anyway, welcome. I haven't done proper introductions. Welcome to the televised comic adaptation hour, where we are here to discuss our very favorite substandard adaptations of popular comic franchises. No, this is Heavy Hands, all right? I think I already said that. You know what it is. And as Phil mentioned, we have a week off, our second weekend off in a row, more or less. We had 2 straight free weekends before our next UFC event, and it's a delight. I'm always excited to have these moments. And hopefully at a certain point, our listeners will have like a Pavlovian association with these free weekends, and they'll be like, ooh, it's going to be fun it's going to be a fun, interesting topic on Heavy Hands this week. You know, I hope we've already ingrained that expectation in you. And boy, folks, do we have a fun topic for you this week. Phil, what are we going to talk about? This was your suggestion, and I want you to intro it.
We are going to talk about weight cutting.
Everyone's favorite. Who doesn't like talking about weight cutting, right? Who doesn't like imagining all of the many embedded videos we've seen of fighters sitting with like sucked in faces with just constant expressions of pain, with like towels wrapped around their limbs, or like in an Epsom salt bath just groaning and like hitting their head on the tiles. Isn't it just every MMA fan's favorite topic to talk about weight cutting? But more specifically, we're going to talk about how weight cutting actually works, not the specifics of draining water from your body, which I don't think either Phil or I fully understand or really want to, but how it affects your fighting style, you know, based on the empiric evidence we have, you know, based on fighters who have cut lots of weight, how it affects your performances, what types of fighters benefit from cutting weight versus which kinds might suffer more consequences from cutting weight or not cutting weight, as the case may be, and, all the various metrics that it affects and all of that. So, I don't know, where do we want to dive in on this, Phil? We're going to talk about weight cutting. Let's go ahead and talk about some of our most prolific weight cutters. Do you have a favorite weight cutting fighter, Phil? A fighter who stands out in your mind as someone who cuts a really tremendously disgusting amount of weight?
Glace Tebow, obviously.
It's got to be Tebow. He's the go-to example. I at this point, I haven't checked the numbers. I'm confident he weighs at least 300 pounds more on the day before a fight than he does when he steps into the cage.
Yeah, the thing is that he's not only just a long-running. I mean, he's not just a huge weight cutter, but he's been doing it for so long. I mean, it's one thing to do hideous weight cuts. It's another thing to do them, to have them for like 10 years in the UFC.
And I'm sure he, like us, is very happy to say that it certainly has not caught up to him, finally, in any way.
I mean, he's, in many ways, I don't know if it has. I mean, he's had an incredibly long career.
True.
I think he's definitely deteriorating now, but I mean,
it's been like 25 years, so
yeah.
Who can really fault him? He's been one of the best lightweights in the org for a decade. So yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about what weight cutting actually affects. I mean, I think that's the interesting question here, rather than just who cuts the most weight. Why do fighters cut weight? What are the things we think that they feel they gain, and what are the things that we think they actually gain and or lose?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is that it feels like a discussion where the things that people think about necessarily seem to align with what we actually see happening in the cage. So we tend to see a lot of, like for example, we had Joe Rogan recently saying that he thinks that weight cutting is cheating, and it's it's much worse than taking PEDs and so on and so forth. And this is that's objectively not cheating. It's just doing something horrible and dangerous to yourself.
Yeah,
and that's bad, but it's not actually illegal.
Much like cupping, weight cutting obviously gives you huge advantages, but it is very dangerous.
Yeah. So I wanted to take a look at the idea of it and the dynamics behind weight cutting, because a lot of the time when someone mentions that they're going to be moving up a weight class or moving down a weight class, the things that people tend to look at don't seem to actually be reflected in the results of how they're going to perform in that weight class. And I would say that the primary factor here is punching power. Is that we will always hear, almost always, when someone moves up a weight class, you will hear, how are they going to deal with the punches up at that weight class? I mean, we heard this with Daniel Cormier and Stipe Miocic,
and also the question that goes with that is their power going to transfer?
Yeah.
Are they going to carry their power up to the new weight?
Yeah. And this is one of the things you will hear all the time. You're like, how is this guy going to deal with? So I think when when people were discussing Luke Rockhold moving up to light heavyweight, people said, he gets knocked out by middleweights. Mm-hmm. How would he stand it? How would he do against someone like Alexander Gustafsson? He would just get knocked out for free. He'd have no chance. But the thing is that punching power is really one of those things which, it doesn't just translate. In many ways, functionally, when we see fighters go up a weight class, it goes up.
Yeah.
And it's not because, and I would suspect that the general dynamic here is not that the fighter in general is actually, hitting harder in any real way. It's simply that they're faster relative to the guys they're going up against. Mm-hmm. And in a lot of ways, they're often just more skilled. That they've been. So there's plenty of examples to look at here. So we have, Cormier, for example, is one of them, right? I don't believe he's knocked out anyone at light heavyweight. Did he knock out Uzumir or did he choke him out?
He TKO'd him from crucifix. It certainly wasn't a hard KO.
Yeah, crucifix TKOs are almost entirely mercy stoppages.
Purely attritional, yeah. Simply because Uzumir did not know how to get out.
So I'm not sure if he's really knocked anyone else out.
I don't think he has
in the UFC.
I don't think he has. I don't think he's knocked anyone out. I mean, UFC's been his only light heavyweight home, but I don't think he's knocked anyone out.
Yep. And then he went up and polished off a major, the most credentialed heavyweight in UFC. And we have guys like Dustin Poirier. Mm-hmm. Wasn't a huge hitter down at featherweight. He was a big hitter, but he wasn't what we see now, which is the man creeping up on the most stoppages in UFC lightweight history.
Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, if the inverse is true, Michael Johnson, famed for his punching power at lightweight, but also for his speed, that may be a bit of a spoiler as to where this discussion is headed, down at featherweight, doesn't seem, we've only seen, I guess, 1-2 fights, but he doesn't seem, Darren Elkins took his punches better than he did Chad Mendez's, a lifelong featherweight. You know what I mean? So clearly, being bigger, going the opposite direction and moving down to try to be bigger does also not necessarily translate to increased punching power relative to the opponents.
Yeah. So, and I think that the main thing is that MMA knockouts are about accuracy. They're about hitting people in the right place. And it is functionally easier to hit people in the right, and they are not, and other than that, they're not difficult. They don't need a lot of power behind them.
Yeah.
you just have you have a small glove. It's difficult to stop. It's a point of leverage. I mean, the question of gloves help or hinder knockout rate is up in the air. It's about, the idea of concussive force spread over a larger area, but with more weight versus a smaller area, but focused to a single point.
There's also the question of how much penetration versus dissipation of power actually matters when you're being hit in the head.
Yeah, exactly. And, from everything we see, pretty much MMA knockouts are generally about accuracy. There are plenty of people who clearly punch hard. Like, for example, Jose Aldo, I would say, probably punches harder than Conor McGregor does. He can probably hit a punching machine harder than Conor McGregor does. He is not nearly as accurate as Conor McGregor is. Mm-hmm. And this is what changes when people go between weight classes, is that they typically, and there are obviously dynamics, at least one physical dynamic which goes against this, but they are typically faster and able to hit people with a little more accuracy than they used to be, and a little more able to respond so that they don't get entirely cleanly when things are coming back at them.
Mm-hmm. Likewise, fighters who go down in weight are both giving up a potential speed advantage while also inviting, like the speed advantage invites the opportunity for their now suffering durability to become an even bigger factor, because the faster guy is going to be more accurate, just, by the nature of being faster. Yeah, I think you're right. Like a lot of people think about with MMA, they think of the distinguishing factor that determines knockouts and punching power. Because, like, let's face it, at the high level, we see a lot more knockouts in MMA than we do in boxing. People just get knocked out so much more easily in the sport. And a lot of that does genuinely have to do with the fact that they're just not as good at this as boxers. That which is okay. It's not the only thing they do. And it's its own sport. But also, like, people fixate on the gloves. Like, having the smaller gloves makes you hit harder. When, we do know the bigger gloves, for however much they affect the dissipation of impact or whatever, they also protect the hell out of your hand. So you can hit people really, really hard. And I think the reason that doesn't make sense to people is because I think people overestimate how much power really has to do with knocking people out. Because, like, boxers take tremendously hard punches. Boxers throw punches harder than MMA fighters on average. Of that, I am sure. Just better technique, better form, faster. Like, the speed difference between the hands of boxers and MMA fighters really, really jumps out if you compare two pieces of training footage from almost any two fighters at the highest level.
Watch like a highlight reel of Julian Hawk or something. Is that the guy I'm thinking of?
You thinking of Aaron Pryor? Or are you thinking of Julian Jackson?
Julian Jackson, though. Julian Hawk Jackson. That's the one.
Yeah. Sorry, you said Hawk, and I started thinking of Hawk Time, which is my boy Aaron Pryor. Yeah, Julian Jackson, one of the hardest punchers ever. And even that guy who was seen as more of a slugger, compare his speed to, like...
Yeah, it just doesn't look like... There's no MMA fighter who punches like that. There's nothing...
But that's because, like... Boxers can take these tremendously superpowered punches with their gloves that allow them to hit even harder than they would otherwise, because they can see them coming. And they don't take the ones that land clean on the chin, even sometimes when they're like jabs or don't look like huge shots. We all know this. I think people just tend to think, all right, well, like you go up against bigger hitters, you're going to get knocked out more easily. Likewise, you have less protecting your hand or whatever. There must be some power explanation as to why MMA fighters get knocked out more. I think it really just comes down to, are they easy to hit cleanly on the chin? And the baseline level of defense, of striking defense in MMA, is obviously already much lower to start with than in boxing. So yes, across the board, they are easier to hit on the chin. And B, now we get into the weight cutting discussion. Cutting more weight not only allows quicker fighters to hit you on the chin, but we believe affects your ability to absorb a shot on the chin as well. So I don't think, I agree with you. I don't think it's all about power. I think speed, accuracy, skill is huge. Skill goes a long way in MMA, more so than in boxing, perhaps, because the other guy's defense is always everybody's worst skill set on the feet. So, like, guys like John Makdessi John Makdessi's not a power puncher, but he's got like one of the more impressive knockout ratios you'll find among relatively uncelebrated fighters. You see quite a few of these guys in MMA who are not like massive power punchers, but have quite a few knockouts or have a knack for hurting people almost without seeming to try. I think a lot of that has to do with skill, with just being able to place your shots and set them up so that the other guy doesn't see them coming. And obviously being smaller and faster than most opponents, as you know, guys like John Makdessi are, makes that easier too.
Yep. So yeah, from my perspective, there are kind of about six overall traits that you see shift when people move back and forth between weight classes. And they are, and basically, if you have let's say you have a choice between two weight classes, right? You are, in the more populous ones, you can be either a welterweight or a lightweight. And so
I want to be a welterweight. Everybody knows the bigger, the worse. So it'll be easier than being a lightweight.
But in general, I feel like, so there's about six things. So let's say grappling, strength, reach, chin, speed, striking accuracy. Mm-hmm. If you are bigger, you are going to help your strength. You are going to be fundamentally larger than the other person. You are going to help your grappling. It is almost universally more helpful to just be bigger than someone else when you're grappling with them. Top position will be, you will be harder to shake from top position. You'll be able to lift them more easily. It is great to be big.
Phil, I suspect that if you were to take your first jiu-jitsu class tomorrow, you would probably not submit anybody. Whereas I can proudly say, as a fat man, that I submitted somebody on my very first day of jiu-jitsu training who was about 100 pounds lighter than me. So yeah, it's tremendously helpful to be bigger when you are tied up with somebody or on the ground. It's a huge advantage.
Yeah.
It is essentially weight on the ground is what reaches on the feet, I think.
Yep. But reach is going to change as well. Reach is typically something that will change as well.
Yeah.
Because, you're going to be going down to if you are in a lower weight, if you are a big person dropping down to a smaller weight class, you're just going to be bigger than everyone. You will have more reach on them.
Yeah.
The downsides are you are going to be slower. You are going to have less striking accuracy, and your chin is probably going to be slightly deteriorated. And this is probably going to be a combination of, weight cutting and the fact that you won't be able to see punches coming. Mm-hmm. And all these things, to my mind, invert, they obviously invert going the other way. If you are small for your weight class, you're going to be faster, you're going to be more accurate, and you're going to be able to take a shot better. You are going to be weaker when it comes to grappling. You're going to be at more of a strength disadvantage, and your reach will be worse comparable to the average reach in the division. Mm-hmm. So I think, and basically, when people are looking at what weight class they're in and whether they should go into another weight class, it shouldn't necessarily just be a simple like, I need to be as big as I possibly can be until I start getting completely fucked up from the weight class and from cutting. I just need to make sure that I am as huge as physically possible until I can't be huge. The question should be, what from those three categories can I afford the trade-off from those three categories? Like grappling strength. If I want to go up, can I afford to trade on grappling strength and reach on the understanding that my chin, speed, and striking accuracy will get better? So, and the classic example here is obviously Robert Whittaker.
Mm. Yeah.
Because he is someone with, as we have found out, freakish bulletproof takedown defense.
Yep.
And he's also someone with a high mobility footwork style, and allowed him to say, okay, I can take hits in these because I'm still able to stuff the takedowns of literally everyone in the weight class above me.
And
there's no one who can out wrestle me.
Is durability affected by weight? I mean, is there a better example in the sport than the comparison of being knocked out in the first round by Stephen Thompson and not being knocked out by Yoel Romero despite 5 rounds of his best efforts?
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of the time you do have to balance this, you know, we obviously have to balance this against the technical and physical improvements of the fights in question, right?
Sure.
A lot of the time when we see weight class changes, they are at fulcral moments in people's career. So they will be like, I am going to take my, you know, it's either it's a young fighter who's just grown into their frame so much that they have to go up.
Yeah.
Or it's an old fighter who's like, you know, who's going to be doing the whole BJ Penn thing of, you know, trying one last hurrah at a new weight class and just getting completely rinsed like they were in the old one.
Other times it often represents like a turning point for a fighter, though, like the I'm going to start taking this seriously turning point. I think that's what we see out of guys.
Nick Lentz down to featherweight, I think, was a great example of this.
Yeah, maybe even like Darren Elkins back in the day down to featherweight. Was a lightweight for a little while and has now been a featherweight so long that's how we think of him. Yeah, it's also that. I think, too, like, oh, shit, what was I going to say? I don't know, Phil. I had a great point, and now it's vanished into the ether of my mind. The thing is that, okay, yeah, we also see people changing weight and improving. I think it's also impossible to ignore the fact that not spending as much time cutting weight, not enduring a camp that is like the latter half of your camp is always defined by how much weight you're trying to cut and everything. You have to imagine that also makes it easier to train your skills and to get better as a fighter when your fight preparation is largely dedicated to becoming a better fighter and not dedicated to making sure you're bigger on the night.
And it's also just got to be it's just got to be more like for some fighters, right? I mean, especially if we're talking the young to older fighter dynamic, you know, the Poirier, Hooker, Jake Matthews type thing. It's also got to just be like, hey, wow, fighting's actually fun now.
Right. It's not just a horrible, miserable self-torture.
Yeah, you're going to look back at it. It's, you know, suddenly the kind of this binding torture of just having to suck every bit of water out of your body is gone. And in some ways, no matter how bad your career might get to that point, at least you're not doing that anymore.
Mm-hmm. Do you think there's a segment of fighters who love the grind so much that, like, is this part of why we cling to weight cutting, or the way that fighters, you know, like, don't want to imagine that it might be hurting them more than helping them, that they're like, no, you know what, we're all going to do the prisoner's dilemma and it's fine. Are there certain fighters who, like, need this as part of their ritual, do you feel like? It's part of, like, the machismo of being a fighter, like, you're going to war and now I will purify myself, I will weight cut, and the suffering is like a part of what makes them proud to be a fighter. I wonder how many fighters don't, you know, like, take some measure of pride from the horrible shit that they put themselves through to do what they do.
Yeah, I think there's probably a big part of it. I also think that, like, some of what we see in MMA is a mismatch between. So when we look at MMA, right, we have to look at it as it's a very, very small window onto the actual, you know, day-to-day life of what goes on, right? Is that people spend a ridiculously small amount of their career actually fighting,
right,
and a huge amount of it in training.
Yeah,
you know, someone with a long career will end up, you know, they'll probably end up fighting less than
a few hours.
Yeah,
a few hours. Meanwhile, they'll be training
hours.
For years, literal years.
Yeah. So there's, in some ways, you know, we see there's certain times where you can see a disconnect between what they feel in sparring and what they see in actual results. And I think in partially a lot of it is that no one likes getting out grappled, and
it is the most frustrating.
Yeah, because I think sparring and trading shots, and when you've got the adrenaline going, it's a lot of fun. and it doesn't actually hurt that much. One of the big secrets of
getting hit in the head.
Yeah, of MMA in general is that people, and combat sports in general, is that when people look at it actually going on, they're like, wow, that must feel horrific. And a lot of the times it doesn't really feel like much at all.
Yeah, the secret is only the body shots and submissions really hurt. Everything else is okay.
Exactly. Something bad has happened to your organs.
Yeah.
Like, you're probably... But the thing is that being out-grappled is tremendously frustrating. And a lot of people just like, I don't want that to happen to me. Yeah. I just don't want it to happen to me. I'm going to be as big as possible to make sure. And they will have times when in the gym where they get taken down by someone bigger than them and ground on, and it will just be absolutely miserable. And they'll think, the last thing I want that to happen is in one of my fights.
Mm-hmm. It's boring. I mean, there's also a huge stigma attached to it. You don't want to have that kind of fight. You don't want to be boring, and allow yourself to be controlled by some anti-sport wrestler. Yeah, I think we're on to something here. I think what we should do, Phil, is take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about fighters. I want to talk more about fighters who have cut weight or who have changed weight classes and how it has affected them. I also want to talk about fighters we can think of who we would like to see change weight classes, or ones we think might seem like obvious picks, but probably wouldn't benefit from the actual material changes of weight cutting, how it actually changes and affects your fighting performance. So we'll talk about that after this. Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it. Well, let's get into it. Welcome back. So I jokingly asked you at the top of the show, Phil, who's the best weight cutter, who's the biggest cutter of weight. What notable examples spring to mind of fighters who did experience a dramatic change in outcome after cutting weight or going up a weight class after ceasing to cut weight?
So I think so. In general, let's tie it back to the dynamics we talked about before. Mm-hmm. So, and that is basically, if you want to grapple, be big. Mm-hmm. If you want to strike, then don't cut too much. And the only physical constraint, I would say, between those two is that you want to make sure that your reach isn't too small. And this is one of the reasons why generally being a squat fighter is just not particularly favored in MMA.
It has its advantages, but I don't think MMA fighters in particular have really had the opportunity to discover them yet. Yeah.
So in terms of a fighter who has moved down and had success, I would say Demian Maia. In that, I mean, admittedly, but this is the thing, is that often when we see someone change weight classes, their success is relatively constrained by the skill and ability of the people they fight in the division. And so Demian Maia, it could be argued, you could say, a middleweight, he lost to really strong wrestlers. He got his way to a title shot and then got shut out in a boring fight. And at welterweight, you could say he lost to really strong wrestlers, made his way to a title shot, and got shut out in a really boring fight.
But how did I know that punchline was coming? Because I've been watching these last couple of years. But yeah, it's like, I think point.
I still think he is more successful at welterweight. Yes. He has a much stronger resume.
Yeah. And it is interesting, right? Like, the thing with weight cutting is it's very nebulous what its effects are. I think it can change for each person, but also like there's a lot of indirect effects tied to weight cutting. Like I mentioned at the end of the last segment, the fighters having more time to train and so on and so forth. Like, it's tough to say with Demian Maia I think it's tough to say how much of his success at welterweight has come as a result of his size, when he has also very clearly like dramatically changed the way he fights. Would K1 Maya have done well at welterweight is my question. Classic K1 Maya. Or Maya who used to pull guard.
I very much doubt.
Right.
I don't think K1 Maya would have beaten, for example, I don't know, let's say Carlos Condit. I say Rick Story, for example.
Sure.
Because we've seen a similar kind of, BJJ guy with perhaps not the greatest takedowns going up against Rick Story and in Gunnar Nelson, and he was just carved up.
Yeah. Rick Story, without the wrestling, you need to out-wrestle Rick Story if you're a grappler. You need to.
Yep. So, and in terms of guys that have gone up, I mean, we've mentioned a few of them already. Robert Whittaker, Dustin Poirier, Dan Hooker, and there was one more, wasn't there? Jake Matthews.
Jake Matthews, a great one. Yeah, I'm thinking of other guys who have gone down as well. I think of a few notable examples like Ross Pearson tried a few years ago. Down at featherweight, got knocked out by Cub Swanson. I'm trying to think of more unsuccessful moves down. I feel like we have seen quite a lot of them in MMA more recently because people are... Go on.
In terms of success, I would say Frankie Edgar. And again, you can look at this from a, similar perspective to Damian Maia if you want,
right.
That he was... but you also have to take into account, things like the general pound-for-pound skill of the people he was fighting. And, Frankie Edgar would have almost certainly become champion if Jose Aldo didn't exist. And Jose Aldo would have been champion if he'd been up at lightweight.
Also, the context of, like the fact that Frankie Edgar is a bantamweight, compared to the size of most fighters today. So he was already undersized in his higher weight class. It's not the same as Ross Pearson, who I think is a perfectly suitable size for a lightweight, or Damian Maia, who should be a perfectly suitable size for a middleweight. I think if Ross Pearson is going to carry on fighting, he should do it at welterweight. Why the fuck not, right? Yeah.
Yeah. He did fine against Diego Sanchez. He's going to get out wrestled by elite people, but it'll be less unpleasant for him, and I think he's actually faster than a lot of people. Chad Laprise does fine up there. So if you look at things like, we can see how fighters who have had success at multiple weight classes have often tuned their games in ways which help, right? Mm-hmm. So, if we think of Frankie Edgar who went down, what do we really think of when we think of Edgar at the lower weight class as opposed to at featherweight as opposed to lightweight? We think of stuff like his ridiculous crushing top game. Yeah,
much more punishing top control is a huge difference. Absolutely. That's kind of the big one, isn't it? That's kind of the big one. Not a ton else has really changed about his style, other than the fact that now he spends a lot more time in half guard beating people up.
Yep, and he's
technically
his
improved everywhere. But
I think he throws less volume as well.
Yeah, I've always assumed that's kind of a factor of age. I'm not sure how much it has to do with the weight cut, because I think the thing is now, Frankie Edgar still doesn't cut much weight. He now cuts what would be probably, for most people's standards, a very healthy, normal amount of weight to cut, because before he wasn't cutting any. So obviously the theory of grappling being the big one improves. What about other guys who are famously undersized? Like, I'm thinking of one of our favorites, John Makdessi. And he sits in an interesting position because what makes him effective at lightweight are the things you would expect. Like, if he had been a featherweight, we might have identified these things and said, oh, maybe he should go to lightweight because he's fast, he's accurate, he's got very good takedown defense, he wants to strike. And so maybe it's better for him to be an undersized lightweight than a featherweight. Like, his style is so drastically, despite being similarly undersized to Frankie Edgar, a little bigger perhaps, his style is different in what he wants to accomplish. And it's kind of hard for me to imagine John Makdessi becoming a top control smasher if he were to go down to 145, So is he in the right division, even though we've always thought of him as a small fighter?
Yeah, that's exactly that. That is also, so I've put down a couple of guys who I thought have changed, who people always think should change weight classes, and I'm not sure whether they should. Mm-hmm. Because I think his speed and his striking. If you put John Makdessi's speed, striking accuracy, and chin down, I think you're looking at a markedly worse fighter.
Yeah.
And he's not generally, like you said.
The only advantage he might gain would be reach, and he would still have fairly short arms compared to a lot of other featherweights.
Yeah, and this is just the fact that reach is just a profoundly damaging kind of thing to have. If you have short arms, this makes stuff. It makes your choices much harder. I mean, the fact is that someone like Conor McGregor had otherworldly reach for a featherweight, and merely has very good reach for a lightweight.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Dustin Poirier, for example, he's completely fine in either division. It's the fact that there are a lot of guys. If you are
right, because Poirier's style doesn't rely on having a huge reach. So he goes to lightweight.
It doesn't rely on having a huge reach, and he had a very long frame for featherweight as it was.
True. Yeah.
So I think John Makdessi is someone that I don't think would have done actually all that much better down at featherweight. And I think another example, and this is an interesting one because it's a hybrid. It's not quite the same rule. It's Gunnar Nelson. A lot of people would say that Gunnar Nelson needs to go down to lightweight. And firstly, like, Gunnar Nelson is he slightly over 6 foot? Like, that is not a...
Is he?
Firstly, I believe so, yeah. Is he?
I'll look this up. I'll look this up while you talk, please.
Yeah, but he is not actually a terribly short welterweight.
5'11". 72-inch reach. No, he's right in there in the acceptable welterweight range.
Yeah,
I would say.
So, but I feel like what makes Gunnar Nelson work is that he is very, very fast.
Yes. His wrestling, his striking.
And he can take a hell of a shot.
There's so much missing fundamentally from his wrestling, his striking, from everything. Except for his submission grappling. Without this, the irony is that had he been in the division that many believe is his ideal division, we probably wouldn't know who he is. I think there's a really good chance he would have been washed out a lot sooner and a lot more easily by fighters who just who didn't see his speed as a huge, obstacle. Who were like, oh, I'm as fast as this guy. What else does he have? Oh, it turns out not much. I can do what Rick Story did, which is just be a better fighter than him pretty much everywhere the fight goes.
Yeah, because Gunnar Nelson, for example, in comparison to Damian Maia, is not a fantastic chain wrestler.
Right.
He's not. He doesn't. He is. Damian Maia does not have an initial shot, really.
Right. They're opposites.
Whereas Gunnar Nelson is just all shot.
Yeah.
He has very little to offer beyond that first kind of explosion.
Yeah.
So he's very much a counter. He's very much a counter fighter in that way. He waits for you he baits you into moving forward and then hits you with a big counter shot or a big counter takedown. And I'm just not sure that would have worked at lightweight. And I think he's happier. He has more fun. And he can take shots better at this weight class. I've never really felt like he would actually be any better at lightweight. You
know how I'm thinking of? My boy, my long lost love, Rashid Magomedov. Would he not have succeeded going up in weight? I know no one listening to the show gives a shit about Rashid Magomedov, so I don't want to spend too much time discussing him. But here we have a quick, accurate technician who fights at a fairly slow pace and who is famed, as much as he is famed, for being very difficult to take down. Probably would have done well moving up, don't you think?
The thing is that he is also quite small. I feel like it's a difficult one to answer.
He's got a long frame.
Yeah, because if I think of how he lost, when he lost against Dariush, it was pretty much. It wasn't that he got out-wrestled, it's that he got muscled in the clinch.
True.
It's just that Dariush just went for the tie plum again and again and again and again.
Dariush watched Beck Rawlings fight with Sohee Ham. He was like, I got an idea.
Yeah. So I suspect, that kind of thing would have happened to him. Because he wasn't a large, powerful lightweight in any way.
Yeah, so that's the interesting thing is like where is the crossover point between like we talk about what style you want to fight. Magomedov has incredibly good takedown defense, but he still can be controlled by grappling by people who are just bigger. Like who are the guys who that's not a problem for? Who in moving up they will enjoy their accuracy, their speed, their better durability, but
Luke Rockhold.
Okay. But isn't grappling going to be an issue for every potentially undersized guy who moves up? Every guy who doesn't move up because he's worried he'll be too small.
Yeah. I mean, it's always going to depend on who you are and what are the dynamics of the division you're going into.
True. Yeah.
Is of course one of the questions. I mean, Luke Rockhold, for example, his takedown defense, which is stellar,
yeah,
and ability to control people in the grappling, which is stellar, would take a hit, but A, he can probably afford that anyway, and B, light heavyweight sucks.
Right, yeah, the difference between Magomedov moving up to welterweight and Luke Rockhold moving up to light heavyweight is vast, to say the least.
Yeah. So welterweight is a division, it is the most wrestle-heavy division.
Mm-hmm.
It without pretty much. I mean, it's perhaps less so than it was back in the GSP era, but there's still a lot of Colby Covingtons and Kamaru Usmans and so on that it would be very, very hard for someone like Rashid Magomedov to just he would if they decide to just stick him in the clinch like Covington did. I think it would be tough for him, but I think he could also beat a lot of shot wrestlers very surprisingly. People would be like, how is he beating these guys? Yeah,
because you can't get through the first level. Yeah, because then you're relying on your speed and everything. I agree. Yeah, I think let's talk about Luke Rockhold then. Let's talk about some of our guys who should move up. We have to end on this. This is our favorite topic. I think it'll probably be a staple of this new iteration of the show going forward. Is both of us getting inordinately exasperated at fighters who, despite all the evidence to the contrary, despite people having demanded it for years on end, will just refuse to move up in weight, are just desperately attached to the idea of being bigger than their opponents. Who are our notable examples? Rockhold is an obvious one. We've also got Jose Aldo, possibly the most famous example. A newer one, much in the same mold, Joanna Jędrzejczyk. She hasn't been defying this obvious option for as long as some of the others. Certainly not as long as Aldo, but she does now seem to be really doubling down on the idea of being the strawweight champion again, rather than being a very good flyweight instead.
Yep. Yoel Romero. He's not getting another shot at Whittaker. What is he doing?
He's middleweighting again.
Yeah, and he's not making weight.
I thought didn't he say he seemed like he was up for it? I guess it was because he's not getting a shot at Cormier, so he's just but he's not gonna. Yeah, they're not gonna give him Whittaker again.
They're just not gonna do it. He missed weight, and Whittaker's beaten him twice.
Yeah,
might be controversial the second time. Might have been the fight of the year, but
absolutely
he lost to him twice.
Yeah, and the second time missed weight doing it. So Ooh. So let's talk about some of these guys. Why do we so desperately want them to move up in weight? I mean, we've covered a lot of the particulars, but let's run down their styles. Rockhold would suffer some of as a more of a grapple heavy fighter, but a lot of his specific issues, the specifics are always different. No fighter's it's never just as simple as moving up or moving down based on what does your style kind of look like. Rockhold's style, is affected by the fact that he has no chin. He has a chin. He's fine, but he has a suboptimal chin. We always have to emphasize he has a human chin, not a professional fighter's ideal chin. And so that right there means that right there to me is always the number one clue. I'm like, okay, you should probably consider not cutting weight. You should consider moving up. Because I have seen it work to fighters' advantages in the past many times. I think that's the big one for Rockhold. His style would probably have to change, but it has already been in the process of changing at middleweight. He's having to adapt to getting knocked the fuck out by everyone he fights now at middleweight. So why not do it at light heavyweight instead? People, you said earlier, people always talk about, well, he gets knocked out at middleweight. It's going to be so easy at light heavyweight. To me, I'm like, what's the difference?
Yeah.
You're getting knocked out anyway. So why not fight the bigger guys and discover, oh, like these guys are worse and slower and it's harder for them to hit me. So it doesn't fucking matter that they hit harder than middleweights because they can't touch me.
Yeah. Also, he's basically losing to technical boxing. You know who can technically box at light heavyweight? No one.
Well, there is Jan Blachowicz. I mean, he should.
Jan
definitely
Blachowicz, the greatest light heavyweight striker.
Yeah. He has to avoid Jan. But other than that,
But yeah, other than that, like there's no one who's going to do what Yoel Romero did.
Yeah.
Like Alexander Gustafsson. Much as I love him.
Yeah.
Like he's not a great boxer. He's just really tough.
No, he's Junior Dos Santos or Anthony Pettis, but with a very tall body and long arms. He's got a great frame for a very undeveloped style, or a fairly one-dimensional style, shall we say.
Yeah.
That one dimension being offensive boxing.
So yeah, and he does things like he doesn't really check kicks at all. So, someone like people have said that, Gustafsson is the perfect terrible matchup for him. I would be very unsurprised to see Rockhold go up and actually hold his own boxing with Gustafsson and then just kick him in the stomach.
Mm-hmm.
It would not shock me in the slightest.
No.
But yeah, so let's talk about some of these other dudes. Yoel Romero, I mean, obviously, Cormier himself said, if I ever wrestled with this guy, he would serve me up. He's just like.
I don't confidently believe that, by the way. I mean, I think DC is a Romero's wrestling career has been marked by a certain kind of I don't know, falling short when it really fucking matters. DC,
yeah. I mean,
DC has certainly
we're
had
talking about wrestling in a wrestling context rather than an MMA one.
Okay,
right?
True, yeah.
In a pure wrestling match, I think Romero is definitely
we're talking about speed being an advantage when you're the smaller guy moving up. Speed's already a fucking advantage for Romero. Being insanely explosive, nobody can time you or predict what you're going to do next. How is that not a tremendously huge advantage at light heavyweight?
Yep.
Yeah.
So he's not getting out wrestled by anyone. Much like much like Rockhold, there's a level of boxing skill which just doesn't exist at that weight class. It's just plain not there.
Jose Aldo moving up to 155 finally.
Yep. What's he losing to against Max Holloway? He's losing to what would he not lose to up at lightweight? Unless he's physically fallen off a cliff, he would not lose to getting out wrestled because that is just not how you beat Jose Aldo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's think of some. I want to think of some other examples real quick before we wrap this segment up. A name that comes to mind, Gregor Gillespie. People have talked about Gillespie as being a guy. I say people talked. I have talked about Gillespie possibly being able to move down. We're constantly talking about fighters who can move up, but Gillespie is clearly much smaller than most of his opponents. He's not. I mean, he probably would have fit right in at lightweight 8 years ago, right? But nowadays, people cut so much weight. He's a dwarf compared to his opponents. But he seems to be doing just fine. Would it at all be worth the risk for Gillespie to move down to? He's a lightweight, right?
Yep. Yeah, he's lightweight. Okay. Not at the moment, I don't think.
Because his style, the reason I bring him up, I should frame this. The reason I bring him up is, unlike most of the other guys we're discussing, his style is geared towards overpowering people and out wrestling them. He's certainly showed off more boxing and whatnot lately, but that's what he wants to do is wrestle the hell out of people. It's hard to imagine that him not having an easier time of that against smaller opponents.
Yep. I think it would probably help him. But I suspect that Gillespie is just going to be slightly capped in his style anyway. I think that there's just basically going to be a point at which he needs to be a better striker than he is. I think at those weight classes, I'm not sure. I think you need to be an absolutely spectacular wrestler to have consistent success.
He seems pretty fucking good though.
Yeah,
but in the sense, the thing is for a guy like Gillespie, you would have to, again, the weight class change is always about weighing the factors, the ones that are affected. So Gillespie succeeds with his wrestling, I think, not only because he's a good wrestler, which he very clearly is, but also because he can keep doing it forever, doesn't get tired. Would that be affected negatively by moving down in weight? We're not sure on that, right? Like, it could be, cutting weight could be, but also being able to grapple against smaller guys might make it less tiring anyway. So, I don't know. Like, that's the thing, is a guy like Gillespie is already having success. Would we have liked to see, like, put it like this, if Gillespie turns out to be our new Frankie Edgar, if he's the next Frankie Edgar, would we have liked to see Frankie Edgar at featherweight all those years? Or was it better? Was he better off having had his impressive lightweight championship career before finally moving down to 145?
Yeah, I think that whatever the right answer is for him, I would suspect it might be going down a weight class, but is that you need to be very optimal with how you approach your career nowadays, because it's just so difficult at these weight classes, featherweight, lightweight, whatever you're doing. It's just, I mean, it was hard when Edgar did it, but it would be insanely difficult now. I mean, Edgar got his title shot off a win over, who was it again? Someone I cannot remember the name of.
Mark Bocek or somebody we wouldn't think of as a Makdessi.
It wasn't even someone that famous as far as I'm aware. But so, Gregor Gillespie, I have seen, we've seen him have to really fight through against bigger guys. Like, I think it was Jason Gonzalez. He just had to absorb a lot of shots before he got to him. And I have to feel like if he came up against someone like James Vick, that would probably be an issue. Is that he would just be getting peppered constantly, and then he'd have to end up sort of running into front headlock series.
How are they in the same weight class? Just the mention of their two names in the same topic. James Vick and Gregor Gillespie. That's like, I mean, we did have a fight coming off Tough or something a while ago. It was Randy Brown versus, I can't remember his name now. There's an ATT guy who's a wrestler. I feel like he's vanished.
Oh, Michael Graves?
Yeah, Michael Graves. Yeah, good memory. Like, there are matchups like that, but holy shit, Gillespie versus Vick would look insane. And knowing that both these guys hit the scale at 155 is fucking bananas. It was Matt Veach, by the way. That's who earned Frankie Edgar his lightweight title shot. So, all right, yeah. Well, a good topic. I mean, I feel like I want to end on this note, and it's not just because I have been heavily.
Oh, wait a minute. There's one more.
Oh, okay.
Couple more things I want to say.
Okay.
So the other thing that we didn't mention is cardio, and there's a reason for that, which is that we talked. And well, I'm not sure, and I think you might agree with me. I'm not sure that cardio improves that much in specific ways, because cardio is dependent upon. Cardio is often measured against the other person, specifically in grappling situations, right? Is that you have the Derek Lewis dynamic. If I'm much stronger than someone, then they are going to be working much less. They're going to have to work much harder against me.
Yeah.
So a lot of the time you will see a bigger fighter. The bigger fighter can simply tire the smaller fighter out by just being stronger than them.
Yeah.
So I think that when this actually matters is if they get stuck in prolonged striking exchanges, because then it tends to be just, they're just working against the weight of their own body, and then the cutting weight tends to matter a lot more. But cardio is one of the things which I think is which is less affected by weight cutting than
I would agree with less. I think in MMA we don't see enough examples of style matchups in which fighters can tire bigger opponents out because of their size. Like, we don't have a lot of great back foot fighters in MMA, and like being able to run a bigger guy around, make him chase you and let him miss, and also just the structure of the sport, the length of the rounds and the number of rounds don't allow those kinds of fights as often either. But I think it does affect it. But yeah, I agree. Like, only in circumstances where you are actually having to deal with the weight of your own body rather than dealing with the weight of the opponent's body. I think the effect on the smaller guy's stamina, if the two fighters are tying up, is drastically, easily outweighs whatever negative effects the bigger guy might incur by cutting more weight, because he gets to use his size and the other guy has to fight against it. So who gets the raw end of that deal?
Yep. Okay, that was pretty much it. I mean, I was going to mention maybe there's a couple of fighters that we've seen change weight classes that I don't think suited them that other people thought did, and they were BJ Penn and Donald Cerrone. And I feel like they are basically this is the fact that things like footwork and reach are really important, and those guys were fighters that I thought were very dependent on having reach advantage or reach parity,
and didn't have a ton of footwork.
Yeah. And you saw like Donald Cerrone, he improved on his wrestling and his boxing.
Oh, did he improve his wrestling? I don't know. Did his timing just get better against big, fat, slow, dumb welterweights?
No, that's almost certainly it.
Yeah.
We saw him do. I mean, he tried it more, and he knew he could do it.
Yeah.
But he was hitting that double leg back when he fought Jamie Varner for the
He hit some incredible takedowns in his fight with KJ Noon. So I will always remember the beautiful transitions of Cerrone in that fight.
It was the fact that he just really wasn't built to be like when he was both of those guys. They were just flat-footed kind of range artillery guys, and they just really weren't built to actually fight people who could trade or like box with them from outside of their own range.
I mean, I don't think he was like it sucks that a guy like Cerrone should be regarded as too small for welterweight. It just sucks because he's probably the exactly right size to be fighting.
Yeah.
But it is hard to look at like the Nate Diaz fight and then look at the Darren Till loss and be like, okay, not that much has changed.
Yeah.
It's just, like maybe...
Or Leon Edwards, for that matter.
Maybe if Patrick Cote had been capable of making 155, Cerrone probably would have beaten him there too. So, yeah. All I wanted to say before was I don't want to end on this note just because... you have now undercut it with that last subtopic, but this isn't just because I've been paid by the anti-weight cutting lobby. But I do want to say that usually I think the better option is to go up rather than cutting weight. If you're not having issues, or if you're suddenly having issues as you get older and wear down, probably being bigger than your opponents is not the one-size-fits-all solution you might imagine it to be. Like if you're Michael Johnson, maybe you shouldn't be fighting at 145 now that you're having trouble at 155. I don't know. That's just me. But usually, weight cutting sucks. It just sucks. It's bad for you. And if you could just limit it to only a couple grapplers do a little more, I would be able to understand that. It would make sense. But you don't have to do it. Being small and quick and accurate, especially in a sport that is increasingly defined by strikers, pretty good. So, be smaller. You'll be shocked at the advantages you may actually find. And let's end this segment. When we come back, we're going to have a very short, abbreviated segment 3. We're going to get to just 2 questions or pseudo-questions from our Patreon patrons. And that'll be it after this. Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. You can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show. I think honestly, Hyung-Gyu Lim, there is no...
Oh yeah, he's definitely at least a top... He could definitely be a top 10.
Yeah.
Heavyweight at least.
With the current dumb style he has, there's no reason to think it wouldn't work, that he couldn't win the fight he had.
He's got an accurate right hand and a flying knee.
That's all you fucking need.
Fucking Corey Anderson would eat that.
Yes.
He would just...
Yeah.
He would know exactly what was coming. And then Hyung-Gyu Lim would fake a right hand and do a flying knee, and he would eat it. Oh, he would eat the fucking hell out of it. All right. Well,
Welcome back, everyone, to Heavy Hands. We are here in the third segment now, and you know what that means. Questions from some of our patrons. By the way, before I get into this, before I get into the heavy bag, I want to say, send us your questions, people. If you're on Patreon, we ran out. We ran out of questions, so we need you to send them to us. If you are a subscriber at the $3 level or higher, send us your questions. If you are a subscriber at the $20 level, and yes, there are a few of you, send in your topic suggestions. We have one of our questions today is actually going to be drawn from an offhand topic suggestion from one of our $20 patrons. So we're really scrambling for things to talk about with you guys, but we know you must have questions, and you got to get them to us. So if you're a patron, send that shit in. If you're not a patron, go on Twitter and just tag it Heavy Bag Questions, hashtag Heavy Bag Questions, and we will also look at that if our patrons are too lazy to provide us what we need. So let's get into it. Our first question today comes to us from Tom. And Tom is actually a $20 patron of ours. He actually has some topic suggestions here. One of his topics I think we really like. We're going to get to that in an episode in the near future. But we're going to use one of his topic suggestions that we did not decide to go with as a question. So Tom says here, do you think the UFC Performance Institute is the future for fighters in regards to training? Get their strength training, nutrition, and rehab in a centralized professional place, and then work with coaches for fight-specific training? So what do you think, Phil? Performance Institute, the new hotness in the UFC world.
I think it's difficult to say. Partially because we haven't really, we don't really know much about the Performance Institute apart from, that it's a centralized training facility run by the UFC, but also because, we haven't really seen many fighters kind of come out of it. And specifically, we haven't really seen many fighters come out of the Performance Institute doing all that well. At the moment, it seems to be like, so...
It's not like it makes them worse. We just don't really see them discernibly change.
So what Tom is getting at makes this is where you go to train your physicality, and then you can, get your technique training in with your own coaches and so on. And that sort of makes sense. But at the moment, it seems like a bit of a filter or a catch-all for people who have fallen out of other training situations and don't necessarily, I would suspect, want to spend the money or the, perhaps the move to go and train at one of the other major camps. So we've seen guys like Yair Rodriguez and Francis Ngannou, start to train quite significantly at the Performance Institute, and the results have not been great, let's say.
Well, I don't know. I mean, think of all the data we've gathered. That's the thing is, I feel like the Performance Institute, the thing we have to start with is we don't know shit all about what they really do there. They seem to, it's like that show where they like would put a sensor on a dummy and have Boss root and punch it and then pretend to know what it meant. So like we've seen a lot of those stats coming out of there. We have seen fighters that are like the ideal Dana White type fighters go there. The ones like down to the details. Like, oh, these are fighters that Dana White has specifically shit on publicly. Like fighters he thinks are just dumb rubes who do exciting stuff and they knock people out and so on and so forth. We've seen the kind of guys who get contracts on the Contender Series. We know what kind of shit Dana likes. It feels like the Performance Institute, with all that out of the way, saying I don't know shit about it. It feels like it's more for us than it is for fighters. I don't feel like this is a future wave of how training is going to go, because I think the future of training, is much as it is for MMA, is going to look a lot more like the present of boxing, in that fighters are going to have their own teams. They're going to have their own nutritionist, their own strength and conditioning coach. Whereas like currently they still have a semblance of that, but they share these resources with a lot of other fighters. I think down the line we're going to see more power for fighters, hopefully, and that means more specific training, specified to their exact needs. And I don't see how the Performance Institute, being a centralized location, is going to allow them to do that. I mean, it's in one location, so they have to move to Vegas, potentially away from their team and everything, to actually go there. And then all the things that we have not seen fighters do dramatically better since going there, but we have heard a lot of stats. We've heard, like, how many Ford Fiestas Francis Ngannou can fit in his mouth at once. We've heard, I don't know. What else is a good, funny statistic? I'm floundering here, Phil. You're supposed to jump in and help me riff with me.
So some of the things we've seen from the Performance Institute have been, almost universally, could be considered pretty good things. So one of the things, they've done a lot of studies on things like weight cutting, the whole recommendation that, you need to cut 10% of your weight and so on. And so in this way, you can see a lot of ways that it would make sense, is that if it's a centralized report for information where everyone can get together underneath as a kind of, it can work as a kind of symposium of like MMA trainers, right?
Sure.
If like your Mike Browns and your Firas Zahabis and your who's the AKA guy? Anyway, but if everyone gets together,
Mendez?
then Javier Mendez. Okay. Everyone can get together, and you can.
Wow.
That's a chance to maybe talk to everyone about because this is the thing, is that if we've been talking about weight cutting in the previous section, how do you then how do you push kind of cultural changes like that out to the fighters? And then that's a difficult question to answer. So that's something that the Performance Institute can do.
Yeah.
And it can do it through things like metrics and studies and so on. There's also another question, which is obviously the trainers themselves, right?
Right.
Is that MMA trainers are weird dudes, and they like being weird, and maybe they wouldn't want to particularly go to a UFC training facility and have to conform to the specific metrics that everyone gives them and have a set way. MMA is still very much in its is still very much in the era where people don't really know what is. People really haven't figured the sport out yet.
Yeah.
And I suspect that people wouldn't necessarily be overjoyed at the idea of necessarily working for the UFC, which is not. It might actually pay better than I don't know. It might pay better than a traditional coaching gig, but I would imagine it comes with less freedom and a whole lot less job security.
It might pay better because you're getting paid by the UFC directly instead of getting a small cut of the small amount the UFC directly pays to your fighter. But it would still be probably a smaller amount than it should. Yeah, I think you're right. Like, I think of Bernard Hopkins, like going to like Johnny Toco's in Vegas and talking about how it's like 20 degrees hotter inside in the summer in this shitty brick gym, and how it smells like piss and feet. And he complains because the fighters these days, get AC in their gyms. I'm trying to imagine a personality like that meshing into the Performance Institute. And it is a little difficult to get those two to work together. All right. Well, thank you, Tom, for your topic suggestion. No, it wasn't a question, but we hope that satisfied you anyway. And we will be getting to one of the other topics you suggested very soon. Now on to our second question. This one comes from Davey. He says, back before the PW, the post-Wyman era, which is what we are now in the midst of, you spoke about the three types of punching power: natural, snappy, and athletic. After watching Cormier's Forgotten Bungalows miraculously return in the Stipe fight, should surprising power be added as a category, or is it just a factor that's present in all styles? So essentially, is there such a thing as surprising power? Are there any specific mechanics that determine surprising power is my question. Because my counter question. Because the original three that Pat and I came up with, natural, snappy, athletic, I would break those down mechanically and say natural power are guys who are heavy-handed. Always a topic that's a notion that's been difficult to explain in the fight game, but we certainly know what heavy-handed is. And if you've been hit by a heavy-handed fighter or seen a heavy-handed fighter just touch somebody and put them out, you know that heavy-handed is like natural power. We know what that is. There's snappy power, which I would say generally comes from being very good and technical, hitting a punch at the right time, consistently hitting your punches at the right time, at the right point in the punch's arc, and also just being a good technical puncher who puts your weight and your body rotation behind the shot. And athletic, guys who are really explosive and fast and hit hard because they're great athletes. What defines a surprising puncher? Because to me, any of those guys could be a surprising puncher, right?
I mean, I think it's more likely to be the snappy guy, right?
Sure, he'd be the one you maybe least expect. He least looks like a power puncher. Yeah. But is that Cormier's type of power? I
mean, I think it is a heavyweight.
Sure.
And I think that's probably goes back to the dynamics we talked about earlier.
Yeah, this ties in very neatly.
Yep. Is that he can catch people out of position in a way that he simply couldn't at light heavyweight.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at Cormier against Bigfoot, it is borderline comical. Is that because
Cormier is like 3 speeds
how much
faster
he is than Bigfoot is. I mean, he is literally just hitting him at will.
Yeah. Which he often did it. Like, I mean, even the Barnett fight, like Barnett is actually like a fairly well-schooled kickboxer.
Yep.
He's not like a dog shit defensive fighter or anything. He can do a lot of things really well. And even in that fight, like, yeah, Cormier was just essentially like, I watched that before the Stipe fight to get a sense of like, well, what's different about Cormier's style at heavyweight? And really it's just that when he wants to hit people, he gets to. That they just at light heavyweight people move out of the way or they're too far away or whatever, but at heavyweight he can essentially just stay out of range until he decides to start hitting somebody, and it kind of works. So I guess like the response, Davey, would be that the type of power you have as a fighter can be affected by your weight class. You can be like a natural puncher is probably going to succeed at a lot of different weights more than the others, but like a snappy or athletic fighter who's just very quick or very precise, as we've discussed today, is going to have better chances at against higher weight opponents. And I think Daniel Cormier certainly fits that. Speed is what really sets him apart at heavyweight versus light heavyweight. But
surprising generally defines someone who hits the perfect shot at the perfect moment. So if we think of Bisping on Rockhold, he manages to line up a shot, whilst Rockhold is standing totally square, literally kind of across the plane of his body, and just cracks him from a position that he can't see. If we think of Eve Edwards against Jeremy Stevens, kind of Eve not a huge knockout puncher, but he just manages to connect a perfect shot on Jeremy Stevens, who is a hugely durable fighter.
Mm-hmm.
So, more recently we saw Cub Swanson against Renato Moicano.
Sure. But is it a kind of...
And that wasn't... Sometimes it's, people getting hit from shots they literally can't see. They're getting hit from a break. Sometimes it's that... And a lot of the time it is just literally just a function of accuracy.
Yeah, I think, because surprising to me does not read as a kind of power. The other three categories, they define what makes the fighter powerful. Being surprising does not make you powerful. Being surprising makes things that aren't powerful look powerful, right? Like, that's the difference, is that it doesn't... Again, people are very fixated, I think, probably because we talk about it so much, because it's such an obvious thing to talk about. But people are always fixated on power as the key ingredient to knockouts. And it's not. I really don't think it is. I don't think we know this, right? You don't have to hit that hard to destroy somebody with a punch if they're not prepared for it. And like Edson Barboza getting knocked down on a jab from Cowboy Cerrone. Does Cerrone have surprising power? I think he just surprised Barboza with a good jab. And
or the fact that Barboza himself never knocks anyone out or down,
despite
with his hands, despite being visibly an incredibly athletic, very quick puncher.
Right. Yeah. That's a great point. Despite looking like an athletic puncher, he doesn't really seem to deliver the results. So yeah, I think there are types of power. I don't think surprising is a kind of power, but surprising is definitely something to aim for, because I think knockouts are more about being surprising than they are about being powerful. All right. So thank you guys for tuning in to this episode of Heavy Hands. We hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. Love having these off weeks. We get to just kind of bullshit about some topics that interest us. What do we have coming up around the bend? What is our next UFC event?
Is it Vic Gaethje?
I think it is. And I think I recall looking at this and thinking it was a surprisingly solid card from top to bottom. I remember
that as well.
I think I might be thinking of something else, but yeah, we got Gaethje Vic, we got Johnson versus Feely, we've got Courtney Casey versus Angela Hill, Ellenberger versus Barberina, that's weird. James Krause, Warley Alves, Moraga versus Figueiredo, I like that. Yeah, not a bad card. Not a bad card at all. And Gaethje versus Vic, one of our constant topics for today. James Vick, the man who is literally Luke Rockhold, but 2 divisions lighter. So that'll be fun. Looking forward to that. Anyway, thank you guys for tuning in. We enjoyed this topic. We really enjoy giving you guys these kinds of episodes, and we hope you guys enjoyed listening to them. Find us on iTunes, Google Play Store, Stitcher, YouTube. Where else are we? I don't know, but search for Heavy Hands MMA. Every Wednesday we do this shit. So thank you guys again for tuning in. Find us on social media. I'm scrambling, Phil. I don't know. I've never.
This is the longest outro ever.
I've never ended an episode before, apparently. Find Phil on social media. I have to at least say the Twitter handles. Phil is at Evil Greg Jackson. I am at Boxing Bush. That's BUSCH. Talk to us both on there. Phil has been getting great marks on Twitter. I mean, I feel like a proud parent that I have just made the exact right, perfect choice in replacing my decrepit old co-host with a fresh young new one. But Phil is a great follow on Twitter, so make sure you check both of us out on there. And until next week, Jesus Christ, let's get out of here. If you tuned in today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been approximately 8 hours of Heavy Hands.
Got there in the end.
What is wrong with me? Sometimes I just start talking and I'm like,
how do I stop this?
Right.